tonight, we've been asked whether we would give 10 minutes, and we said no for elections. But we have to, because when this chat comes up, you'll know. Hang on just a second, please. Sorry. Security check, yes. Yes, we've done the security. You've done all the security check? Yes. And he's definitely here. Yes? Security? Thank you.
Order, order. The House will come to order. The Prime Minister has the call. The Honourable Scomo, the Minister for Spin.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to answer the question from the Leader of the Opposition about whether or not my government is fit to govern for another term. And he raises 3 questions. Mr. Speaker, I am always willing to debate such matters with the Leader of the Opposition, a man full of phrases and no substance, unlike me and my government. Mr. Speaker, the first question that he raises, which is right on point, he thinks is around our incapacity to deal with climate change. And in particular, he points to the fact that nearly half of Australia was on fire not 2 years ago. Mr. Speaker, he suggests that we were unaware of this. Mr. Speaker, as you know, and as I know, I was very much aware that half of Australia was on fire, as the Leader of the Opposition says, because I was watching it with Jenny and the family in Hawaii on the news. Mr. Speaker, and as Jenny would attest, I don't hold a hose. I don't hold a hose, Mr. Speaker. There was nothing I could do about it. And this is the sort of hyperbole we get from those opposite when they talk about half of Australia being on fire, Mr. Speaker. The centre of Australia wasn't on fire, Mr. Speaker. Lake Eyre wasn't on fire, Mr. Speaker. The sea near Darwin wasn't on fire, Mr. Speaker. Arstake in Antarctica wasn't on fire, Mr. Speaker. Slimo's phone wasn't on fire, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the trouble with the opposition. And of course, we've actually dealt with this. We've remediated it, not by some false targets. We've remediated it by putting most of Queensland and half of New South Wales underwater, so there won't be any more fires. So we've risen to the occasion, Mr. Speaker. We understand climate change and the need to get there quickly. Mr. Speaker, then the second thing he raises the economy, and he raises our response to the COVID arrive and all those other issues in the economy. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're about jobs. We're about jobs. We're about jobs on this side of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the Treasury, we're about jobs. And I'm not just talking about jobs for people in my party or my own friends. I'm talking about jobs for lots of people. Jobs for women. 1 million women. We put 1 million women into jobs, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not just talking about a bit of extra ironing or looking after more kids or a few more sexual favours. I'm talking about real jobs, Mr. Speaker. Real jobs where they're earning nearly 60% of what a man gets. Those sort of jobs, Mr. Speaker. And you can't look. The member from Tagatanga holds his hand in his face and he says about time. Well, I'm saying to you, it was only 6 months ago, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal Party understood that any woman actually was in the community outside of the home. We've responded quickly on this, Mr. Speaker. We've responded quickly. And the other thing is getting people off unemployment. Getting them off unemployment into jobs. And we do that, Mr. Speaker, by targeting them through welfare cheats. And that's the robo-debt. Now, of course, yes, with a $2.2 billion waste and 35 people taking their life, there's a bit of tweaking we need to do with the policy, a little bit of nuance here and there. And I hear the member for Whitlam yells out, what about giving the money to the unemployed? This is the problem with the Labor Party. They don't understand. We've already wasted $2.2 billion. We don't have more money to throw on the unemployed. Mr. Speaker, we're about getting them into jobs, like building car parks. There's nothing wrong with building car parks. And the Leader of the Opposition and all of those on the other side of the Treasury benches, all of the people, they say, even the person who's coming in now, he's just about to sit down. That's the typical thing with the Labor Party. They arrive late at the show. This is the thing. They don't realise that with the building of the car parks, there's been jobs in that. There's jobs in deciding the building of the car parks. There's jobs in getting all our political analysts to see whether they make the best benefit for people in my party. And then there's the spin associated with selling that to the communications through the community. And Mr. Speaker, when the treasurer behind me, the greatest treasurer in the world, Josh Freud Slip, when he says to me, we're about to build the car parks, there'll be jobs in that too. And because of the time it takes us to build the car parks, we'll have to pull them down. There'll be jobs in that as well. This is what we do in this side of politics. We build sustainable jobs, jobs that keep on giving. Mr. Speaker, and the last thing, and this is the bit that I think is hilarious, Mr. Speaker. I think this is hilarious. When I get to hear the leader of the opposition talk about values and say that my party, that I don't have values. Mr. Speaker, I've actually been brought up with values, the values that resonate in my life, like not being a bearer of false witness. Mr. Speaker, I tell the truth whenever I can avoid it. Mr. Speaker, I'm very truthful. And on top of that, let me say this to the member for Corangamite. Let me say this to you so that I can get your attention, Mr. Speaker. I say this, that when you have a go at us with values, we are the party that observes the Sabbath. We make sure that not just our family, but our servants, our slaves, our concubines, they don't work on Sundays. We've got rid of penalty rates to make sure no one else can work on Sundays, Mr. Speaker. We're faithful to values, and on top of that, Mr. Speaker, he has a go at some of my ministry. He has a go at Barnaby Joyce about departure from family values. Well, there's never been anyone more committed to families than Barnaby Joyce. He had one family, he started the second family. How more committed to family values can you have that? Alan Tudge is trying his hardest, and behind that we have a former Attorney General. They're all committed to starting new families, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when you criticise the Minister for Ageing, Richard Colbeck, and saying he hasn't done well because all these people are dying in aged care homes, Mr. Speaker, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? People die in aged care homes. That's what happens. They go there to die. But let me say this. Richard Colbeck, I've never seen anyone put in more effort every waking hour. Now, admittedly, he's not awake for very long, but when he is awake, he really gets into it. And I hear the member for Whitlam call out, what about when he went to the test in Tasmania? Well, if you're Minister for Aged Care, it's obvious you're going to be Minister for Sport. He was there representing the government watching sport. And, look, the member for Jag's got his hands in his head again. And he says, what about when he went to the nightclub with the burlesque dancers with their breasts out? Well, he is probably filling in for the Minister for Women. Now, Mr. Speaker, this is the thing about us. We're full of values. And let me say this. The thing that I really object to is when they attack Greg Hunt, the Minister for Health. When they go after him, they don't go after his brother Mike anymore, they go after Greg Hunt, the Minister for Health, and they say he was slow with the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, he was up there all hours of the night on Google looking for vaccines, making sure we got them into the arms of the vulnerable. Those students of wealthy elite private schools got them first. We made sure we rolled them out to the rest of the community over time. And he's leaving. He's not leaving because of any issue with his ministerial portfolio or the way his performance. He's leaving to let in a new person. Rita Sojourns is coming in, who's a young, upcoming person who's coming in. And I hear the member for Corangamite yell, what about his nephew, Jimmy Bates? Well, I've never heard of him, but let me say this. I haven't heard of his nephew. I haven't heard of his cousin.
The Prime Minister's time has expired.
Well, let me say this, Mr. Speaker, that if your name, whether it be Greg Hunt, misogynist, or Master Bates, you won't be standing for the Labor Party.